see the world through other people's eyes. Now, empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.
Hi, it's Edwin Rutsch from the Center for Building a Culture of Empathy, and today I'm here with Jan Hutton to talk about how we can build a culture of empathy and compassion. Thanks for joining me, Jan.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Edwin. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, so I want to give a little bit of background about you, and I met you through the compassionate listening community, and I looked on the website there, and it said that you're, besides being a trainer with the compassionate listening project, you're a social worker in hospice and hospital settings, meditation teacher, and a group facilitator in a Quaker community. Are those?
Yeah, those are some of my past lives are as a social worker working in medical settings. I left social work in the late 90s, and I've been a meditation teacher. And basically, I would describe myself, if you were reading my obituary, as a kind person in every interaction of my life, as much as I can be.
Well, I'm showing your Facebook page right now, and you have a big tree on your Facebook page. What's that about? What is that? What is that telling us?
Well, that's a tree about a mile from my house, back in the woods. It's well over 100 years old, and I love that sense of. And I'm looking in the distance because I'm visualizing the tree. I love that sense of groundedness and age and peace when I look at that tree. And when I look at that tree, I feel that same way.
So how long have you been working with a compassionate listening project? And can you tell me a little bit about how you got started with them and your experience with them?
I've been with them for about 6 years, and I came to them in 2006, and a person who began compassionate listening and whose model Leah Green, who's the director, adapted, is a woman, or was a woman, named Jean Knudsen-Hoffman. And I've been reading her work about compassionate listening, and I was sold. And one of the things that really brought me there was that I was, and I could still say I am, the queen of judgment. And I hated the toxicity of my judgments. They were like, a turbulent water, and I didn't know how to stop them. And I did my first compassionate listening 2-day workshop, and I came out of there and went, wow, what happened? I want more of this. I began to see that some of my judgments could melt, and I could begin to see people as human beings, not as objects of my derision. Sad to say that, but true.
Well, I was just seeing here that you had a guiding principle, and it was how do we look at those who differ from us and see our shared humanity? So that's kind of like maybe the opposite of judgment then.
It is. I mean, that really is how I approach life, Edwin. When you sent me some things to think about with regard to empathy, I don't think there's anything in life that I don't regard through that particular prism. Is how can I look at that other and see their shared humanity with me, even if they've committed a heinous crime. I know there's a human heart in there. How can I find a way to see that human? And I look at our world today, and I'm just immensely saddened by all the people who are digging moats and not building bridges.
Well, with these dialogues, I like to kind of start off with a metaphor of what is empathy and compassion like. It kind of helps kind of frame the discussion kind of pictorially. So you kind of brought up a metaphor right there. So is that your metaphor for empathy and compassion, or what would you say is what is empathy and compassion like for you?
Well, I'm gonna sort of frame it down to begin with starting with empathy. I can remember, as my mother was a social worker, and I was always this kid who wanted to be like my mom, being there for the people and helping them. And as far back as I can remember, there was always a piece of me when someone who was hurting, I knew it. I don't know how I knew it, but I knew it. I could read their faces. I could read it in the tone of voice. I don't think I knew what to do with it. And sometimes I felt powerless and didn't know what to do with that either. So there was just a sense of knowing that has always been there for me. And my life trajectory has been how to work with that, because sometimes it means, for me, when I was a bit younger, taking on people's suffering and not knowing what to do with that. And so that was in many ways the place where I began to dig moats instead of building bridges. I had to find a way of dealing with making myself whole inside, so I didn't feel completely knocked over by someone else's suffering.
Okay, so you're kind of seeing empathy then as when you're very sensitive to the people around you, and you're kind of taking on their, especially pain, I guess, and suffering, and then it's kind of wearing you down, and you're kind of like wondering, how do I deal with this?
Yeah. I mean, it's been a lifelong journey for me to sort of realize I'm one of those folks who, there's a wonderful book I read years ago called The Highly Sensitive Person. I read that book and went, oh my God, someone finally described me. There's nothing wrong with me. And I'm one of those people who finds it very easy, too easy. So that sense of empathy is a real knowing. I've gotten older, I've had to find some ways of feeling whole inside, so I don't take on someone else's suffering, so I can still be there for them. And so I think there's a subset of people who are like me. It's not that we're blocked from empathy. It becomes a question sometimes of feeling like someone else's, whether it's pain, can be like a tsunami. So I have to find a way of managing my own stuff. I mean, my feeling is that no matter what someone else is doing or saying, I'm still responsible for my own conduct. I'm always looking inside to find the ways in which I can be connected to other people that are healthy, as opposed to the ways when I joined the Compassionate Listening Project of someone who was judging everybody else because I couldn't look at my own part in that.
Yeah, so the judgment might have been like the way to protect yourself. Then it sounds like that if you're kind of feeling overwhelmed by others, if you can judge them, it kind of creates that moat. It kind of helps create a moat and boundaries. Or
I think there's a piece of that. I think my judgments are, and I believe that one of the things that Gene, I'm deviating a bit, but there's a point of this. One of the things that Gene Hoffman said, the woman who coined the term compassionate listening, is that we are all wounded. And it becomes a case of identifying those wounds in each other. And I think I was unable to identify that I had my own wounds. And so I'm projecting them all over you and anybody else. And so I had to find a way of saying, this is my stuff. What do I do to, again, getting back to that metaphor, build a bridge, instead of digging that moat and saying, oh gosh, Edwin, you're the problem. And so that has been, the journey of connecting to someone else's humanity, of finding more and more ways that I can be whole and healthy inside, so that I can connect without judging, without pushing you away because I'm in pain around your pain.
Yeah, kind of using that metaphor, there's kind of like, maybe there's like building a bridge, but it's like somehow a healthy bridge. It's like, instead of being a tsunami and kind of being overwhelmed by others, there's something about needing to have some kind of a, I guess kind of a right or good connection, or.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that Quakers talk about, and I am not a religious person, I am a spiritual person, but one of the things that Quakers talk about, and I've learned a good deal of in being in the Quaker community over the years, is seeing that of God, or whatever term it is people want to use, in the other. And for me, it's honoring that, that other person is wounded and so am I. So how can I connect to them? And one of the things that, I'm always trying to do when I'm irritated with someone, or I'm judging someone, or I'm angry with someone, is I have all these ways of going inside of myself and looking at what's going on and finding a way, and we can talk about that as we go along, and finding a way of beginning to see that that person is wounded in their own way. They often have a story that I don't know anything about. I don't even have to know what the story is. Just knowing that they are motivated by something that I may know nothing about opens the door for me to feel compassion for them in a way that takes me away from all my demonizing. And I think that demonizing is something that so concerns me these days, is that we have a black and white world. I'm right, you're wrong, as opposed to we're both human beings and have different ways of looking at things.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like it's focusing on kind of going deeper. It's like kind of say, here's the situation that I'm seeing, kind of what's underneath it, and kind of having kind of that perspective or that goal.
It is. I mean, I'm just repeating myself, but when I teach workshops, I try to keep it as simple as possible. And I really believe that no matter what someone else does, I am still responsible for my own conduct. If I'm going to expect you to change to my specifications, that's not going to work. I spent a lot of years being a victim doing that, and I found it just didn't work. And I find that when I take responsibility for my own stuff, it's a lot easier to look inside, to see where I have been triggered by something or someone, and to find a way of either sharing my vulnerability about the ways in which I have been triggered by something that you've said or done. And I find that when I'm able to share my vulnerability with someone else, that opens the door for them to do the same thing. We both become just human beings.
Well, what I'm interested in doing in these conversations is really exploring how do we build a culture of empathy and compassion. It's like, it's really about that bridge building, right? It's like, and what's interesting to me is this quality that, and I hear a lot of people talk about being highly sensitive, and they have to kind of shut down because they get overwhelmed and all that. So that's a very, it's a lot of people are in that situation. I kind of wonder about the kind of how that really works, and what are the ways to transition, or somehow we're going from a tsunami being overwhelmed to more of a healthy bridge or something like that. And how do we kind of transition from that tsunami to the bridge type of relationship?
Yeah, a bridge that has supports. I mean, I think that's an excellent question. I mean, I can certainly share with you some of the things that I do and that I teach. One of the things that I'm just fascinated by these days is the burgeoning academic field of altruism, all the research that's going on in that. And I've been taking some of those practices in altruism, and I work with them myself, and I teach them in workshops. And some of them are just so simple, it's almost embarrassing. I mean, there's been some wonderful research. One of my favorite go-to sites is the Greater Good Science Center in Berkeley. And some research that came out a while back showed folks who watched an episode of Oprah, The Queen of Good, were more willing to help with someone in a really boring task. And so some of the things that I do when I find myself judging someone is I picture people in my life who do good. I picture people in my Quaker community who week after week after week go to the interfaith shelter and they feed the homeless. I picture, the folks who are out picketing for peace at what we call our little post office in Chapel Hill. And as I picture the people who are out doing good, what I began to find inside of myself is my heart begins to melt. And the person I am judging, I can now see as a human being, as opposed to someone who is the devil or, someone who is awful. It begins to melt me inside. I mean, other versions of that for me are to call up images of people who care about me. And they don't even have to be people who love me. They could be the wonderful people in my neighborhood when I walk my dog who always smile at me. I think about the benefactors in my life, and just the very act of visualizing some of those people softens me inside, and I begin to build that bridge to the other. And some of these things seem, gosh, they're so simple. Guess what? They are so simple. I also have some favorite quotes that I recite to myself. If I'm talking to someone and I can feel myself getting triggered, I have a favorite quote that I repeat to myself inside. That's a quote about peace. And I begin to feel as if I'm more whole and more willing and able to see that person in the moment and get a sense of, well, there's probably some wound there in them that I'm not aware of. And I'm more willing to listen to them or to try to find a way to connect to them. I mean, all the things I'm talking about when I'm talking about altruism, really come down to a sense of kindness in a lot of ways. But all the things I'm talking about are internal. They're ways that I work with every day. And I come away from interaction still feeling triggered. I come home and I'm like a dog with a bone. I keep working on it. I don't want to keep adding more toxicity to the world. And the more and more that I spend time fixated on what someone did to me or what someone is doing that I don't like, or, types of things that take me away from being present in a positive way to the world, those are the things I want to work on.
Do you have any stories or anecdotes of how that actually played out? Like some times when you really were out there, had a problem with someone, were judging them, and kind of how that kind of evolved?
Well, I'm just trying to think what I do since we're going to be, this is a video. Let me just stop for a second and sort of go inward and see what comes up. I'm just sitting here thinking. There was someone in my neighborhood who did something illegal with my homeowners association. And it was very upsetting for all of us. And I was very angry, constantly angry, as a matter of fact. And this sense of anger was predicated on a difficult relationship with this person over the years. And I would find whenever I passed this person on the street, my heartbeat would go from da 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 da, I'm having a great time walking my dog, to oh my God, and that's not the place I wanted to be. And so I found myself constantly having to work on seeing this person as a human being, just because I didn't want to feel as hijacked as I felt. And one of the things I got in touch with was how powerless I'd felt in this relationship about what this person had done. But the other part of it was I began to do this benefactor exercise I just shared with you. I began to see just the good people in my ordinary everyday life. And I looked at this person inside, because she was no longer around, but I looked at this person inside of myself when I began to see the good people who care about me. And I began to see how much she must be hurting. And it softened my relationship toward her. And it gave me a sense of more room about her. And it allowed me to release her from my life. How do you feel in your life when and maybe you don't do this, Edwin, but I think as all human beings, we're human. There are times when your attention is completely captivated by someone and you feel hijacked. What do you do?
Yeah, I've had that where kind of with relationships, with different people. I get so worked up I can't sleep.
That's it.
And it's like, sometimes I just had to create boundaries. And then, right afterwards, it was like, we're kind of trying to work together in some way. I said, I just can't do this. And this is the boundaries that I have. And sorry, but that's the way it is. And so that's one that kind of comes to mind. Some that were just kind of like overwhelming that I remember from recently.
Well, and I appreciate that, because that's one of with this person, I had to set boundaries too. But I think, as I think about boundaries, part of setting a boundary for me then becomes, what is the attitude with which I set that boundary? Is it an attitude of, it's like you see signs and you see an X through something, which is a sign of get this out of my life. And I think the question for me in setting boundaries becomes, what's my attitude? Is it because I'm aware that I can't have that energy in my life? This person is who they are. And it's not a question, I think, for me. It's, again, that sense of kindness. How can I see this person as a wounded human being that I don't want in my life, but I still see that they're hurting? So it becomes, again, a question of still trying to build a bridge, even though, like you, I've set a boundary to take care of myself.
Yeah, it's trying. Well, I try not to, be judgmental about them, like saying, like you're saying, kind of looking deeper. But
Yep.
that even though I'm looking deeper, I do have to create this boundary. It sounds very similar to what you're talking about. Is I mean, kind of the picture that keeps coming to mind for me with what you've been saying is this idea of the tsunami, where you're kind of like overwhelmed by someone versus a bridge, which has a little bit more of a, it's
Connectivity.
yeah,
Connect.
yeah. There's kind of two sides
Yep.
somehow,
Yep.
and there's only so much that kind of can come across the bridge at a time, or something like that.
No, I think that's true. And I mean, part of what I hear you talking about is, and I absolutely, if we don't take care of ourselves, we can't be an empathic or compassionate person in the world. I mean, I'm hearing that if we don't set boundaries, there's really no way we can walk across that bridge. We'd be running for the hills in a lot of ways. I mean, one of the things that I try to teach in workshops is, I mean, I think most people have heard of Abraham Maslow's basic needs. I mean, it's so simple, but do we do it in our culture? No. I mean, how I am so aware that I'm someone who can do verbal damage when I haven't eaten. And when I haven't slept, you wouldn't be doing this interview with me today if I hadn't slept. But, I mean, part of what I talk about with myself, talking with my people, is if I can take care of and address my needs, I can be more present. I can set boundaries. I can build that bridge and walk across it. And it also reminds me, if I am so impacted by not taking care of my basic needs, and I'm fairly privileged, what does it mean for people who don't have their basic needs taken care of chronically, and the ways in which they behave? And that, again, gets back to empathy and compassion for me. If I'm seeing someone who doesn't have that foundation, it's no wonder that they're in an angry or violent or whatever place all the time. And that's also, can I build a bridge of understanding to that as well?
Yeah, I've seen that. I was at the Occupy Berkeley. We had what we called the empathy tent, and there was a lot
Saw
of
that.
people. Oh, there was a lot of
Yeah.
people, living on the streets, and some of them were like had a hair trigger. It was like the slightest thing could kind of set them off. You could just feel the amount of stress that they were in, and as we have that stress in ourselves, it seems it's easier for us to kind of lash out. So it seems like you're talking a bit about that, about the self-care that we need to, and I call that self-empathy, or you could see it as self-compassion, and as well, that we need to um, kind of see about getting our own sense of mindfulness and sensory awareness and calmness. And
I agree. I mean, I think we're using different words and talking about absolutely the same thing. And I mean, I mean, as I listen to you talk, part of what also occurs to me, you also asked about other ways that we can build a culture of empathy and compassion, and some of the things that compassionate listening teaches. These are outer strategies, even though I believe ultimately the outer strategies are helpful. But in the long run, we are the ones who have to be worked on inside. And some of the outer strategies are, as I listen to you talk, it's, how do we reflect back to someone the words they use so they actually feel heard? I mean, what a gift that is. I mean, how do you feel when you're sharing with someone and they go, oh yeah, that happened to me, and let me tell you what I did. And how do you feel when that happens?
Yeah, that's one of the blocks to empathy, I think, is well, this kind of ties back to kind of the definitions of empathy, in the sense that I have like a four-part, and I'm taking the attention on myself, is that the
This
first,
conversation.
yeah, it's an
Yeah.
exchange. So it's I see is self-empathy, which is sensory awareness, mindfulness of what's going on with myself. And then the second part I call mirrored empathy, which is also, by the academics, call it emotional or affective empathy. And I think that's what you're talking about, is that mirroring, that we want to see how we can mirror the other, and kind of clear the mirror so we can more clearly mirror the other at kind of like their emotional level. And then the third part of empathy I call imaginative empathy, or the academics call it perspective taking or cognitive empathy, which is that as we have a sense of self-awareness, we see ourselves as separate beings that can take perspective of the other person, kind of take into consideration all the effects on them that's having them create the perspective that they have. And then the fourth part of empathy is empathic action, which is that as those other qualities get kind of lined up, it's how do we work together in kind of this negotiated, active way. And it's kind of like a negotiated holding both of our humanity together at the same time and kind of negotiating that in a way that they're both, the action holds both needs and values of both parties. So I just want to create that framework because what you're talking about for me is that aspect of the mirroring. What are the things that we can do to mirror each other back? And that helps create that kind of that emotional resonance between us.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching your hands as you were talking, and you were talking about how we can hold, and I'm going, well, there's a bridge for you. I mean, that is, it's a sense of, I mean, everything I heard you say, and I'm obviously condensing it, is about how do we connect to each other as human beings. I mean, we have all these different categories, but ultimately it comes down to is how can I truly see you?
Yeah.
And it's, the other piece I was going to add, and I'm not sure, where this falls in the four categories you just listed, but there's a place in which, for what I'd call deepening inquiry, we call this in compassionate listening, where I'm asking you questions that empower you. I'm not trying to fix you. That assumes I know what's good for you, and I don't. I'm trying to empower you or the person to whom I'm talking to find their own answers, the contours of their own journey. And in doing that, there's a real sense of, I think, two human beings going more deeply together. And I'm creating the space for you to do that without trying to take you over and take you on my journey.
Yeah, someone I asked about, for metaphors of empathy, they said for him it was, he said empathy is like Dante's Inferno. And, Dante goes into the Inferno, and I think it's Gabriel is the angel that goes down with him. And there's a picture of them going together, and Gabriel has his arm over Dante's shoulder as he's looking at all the horrors of the world, or the horrors in hell at different levels. So he says empathy is like someone going with you into this and kind of having that sense of presence. And so it sounds a little bit, it kind of reflects what you're saying is going deeper, but going deeper together.
Yeah, I love that example you just used. I mean, it's, I can't even embroider on it. I mean, I think it's a wonderful example of it. Here we are walking into hell together, but we're walking into hell together. And I don't know, there's a point at which, we had talked about, I have some very dispirited feelings about the nature of our toxic dialogue in partisan politics today, which I think, our conversation in many ways lends itself to, in that we have dichotomized and split and are demonizing each other. Here we are walking into hell, and you gave a great example, and the opposite of that seems to be happening all the time, is that we are sending each other to hell or inferno, and doing it in, a happy talk way. And I think there are better ways of doing it. And I'd like to believe there's a much better environment for talking about partisan politics than the one in which we live today.
Yeah, so you'd like to create a culture of empathy in our political realm.
I would. I mean, in many ways, it's just touching on things we've already talked about. But for me, there's a sense of, I go in to read the newspaper in the morning and the letters to the editor, and my shoulders meet my ears. I begin to feel my teeth clench, and it's an awful feeling, the fact that I want to engage in democracy, and yet when I do that, all I feel is really upset. And I read because I want to find out what's happening in my community. And I find that one set of citizens are demonizing the other set of citizens. Whatever happened to people talking to each other. And for me, it becomes a case of I want to have my say, but I don't want to be demonized for it. And I don't want to demonize you if you happen to have a different say. And part of that for me is, and this again touches back on what we were saying in the very beginning, is that I believe everybody has their own story. And if I had some sense of your story that you grew up with, or what your baggage is, or where your beliefs came from, I would probably not agree with you. I might agree with you. Who knows? I doubt it. But it would give me the capacity to build a bridge to you as a human being. And I find that is just so sadly lacking today. I wonder what it would be like if we had a greater culture of empathy and compassion in our political scene. I'm talking about being in the tent at Occupy Berkeley with a lot of angry folks. What happened when, there was a safe or a safer container for empathy and compassion? Did any of that change at all?
Yeah, we had people come and kind of just share their stories. I mean, there's several young people who had kind of come from homes where they just didn't feel a lot of connection. They're out on the road, they're feeling lost, kind of alienated, and they just wanted to have some place to come and talk, or there was so much strife, within the community itself, so many different factions within the encampment, and so they would come and bring their stories. Like, I remember just one woman was just really upset because she was very outspoken, and at night people came and slashed her tent with a knife and stuff like that. So, and there was like knife fights, attempted rapes, so it was a little bit of a mess there. So, but people were really kind of on the edge. But kind of going back to the political scene situation, I hear a lot of frustration that you or
yeah
about or
back to what you just said, though, if you don't mind.
Okay, sure.
You were talking about, even though there was a lot of tension, at Occupy Berkeley, there was still a container for people to be able to come and share their stories. And what happened, in your estimation, when people were able to share their stories? What was your perception of them?
Yeah, they're some of them would kind of go into tears, and kind of we'd be there to kind of hear what it was where they were, and kind of have that arm over the shoulder as we're descending into their hell with them, and just that quality of someone being there. You leave, you're kind of taken somewhat out of the hell, and your consciousness is filled with, hey, there's others here. I'm not alone. So I think that was like a contribution. I think that metaphor, is very accurate, or it has a real quality, that sense of, oh, there's other people here with me. I'm not alone. And that kind of it's that stress level kind of goes down, and they're kind of more able to kind of engage and not have such a hair trigger about. I mean, it was amazing the things that would set people off. It's just, and when they're so stressed, it's like they're right on the edge. It doesn't take much to get them to be ready to start a fight, and it was just so. I mean, even a simple thing like this same woman, I remember she was really complaining about that there was no money for like just tampons for the women, and then a person who was kind of trying to, from the outside, trying to assist and help. She says, well, make a list of what it is that you need, and I'll go see about getting it. And the person who had that, she actually kind of blew up and said, I don't have, why do you want me to do this? So it was just even the request of her doing something. So then I kind of went in there and said, oh, you're wanting this, this, and this is important to you. She said, yes, that's it. So it was all she really wanted, at least initially, was just let me be heard and seen, so that I'm not alone in this hell, and that quality of just being heard and seen. It kind of seems to be the starting point for, before we can do anything else, we've got to get that connection, that mirrored, and that's almost like half of I don't want to use the word battle, but because it's so confrontational, it's half of the effort is right there.
Well, I agree. I mean, in some ways, again, we all use different words. I mean, what I've heard you describe is basically compassionate listening. And I'm sure, these are all branches in the same tree with multiple names.
Yeah.
But the simple gift of being heard, especially when people, that's such a gift that's given so little in our culture because we are all so needy. You start telling me something and it triggers me to want me to tell my story in response to that. And then you're no longer heard. And it's that wonderful gift of being able to hear someone. And so I think about our partisan politics, and I begin to realize, what if instead of demonizing someone because they have a different view, we sat down and I asked what your story is and where your beliefs come from. I mean, for me, the very fact that someone wants to listen to my story at times softens me. And I'm also aware that when someone is able to be vulnerable and share their story, it opens the door most of the time for me to do the same thing. And suddenly we've ratcheted from a 10 down to a 6 or a 5. And then we have a conversation and a relationship, whereas before we had an explosion.
Yeah, well, how can that be implemented in the political realm? I mean, you're doing all these workshops with compassionate listening, and you've got like all the tools, like a whole kind of a process. But how do you kind of bring that in, how to transform the political dynamic to have more connection and bridge building between people?
Well, the age-old question. I mean, this is one of my little campaigns, to be quite honest with you. I model it at every chance I get. I mean, it's a bit like, do you know who Holly Near is, the folk singer from the 70s and 80s? She had a wonderful song about how the water will wear the rock away, drop by drop by drop. And I figure I'm one of those drops. So I just had a letter published in our local newspaper over the weekend about a political issue. And it was about being human beings and that violence existed on both sides of the issue. Every single chance I get, I try to live what we've been talking about. And I've had friends in the county in which I live and which I'm very politically active say to me, how did you get to be this way? And so, I don't have any particular idea for how to do it en masse, but I figure if each of us takes that responsibility to do what you're talking about, to build a culture of empathy and compassion, one by one by one, that there's a great deal of hope. And so that's what I'm doing. And there will be people who will notice. I don't know what seeds are being planted, but I have to trust that seeds are being planted. Just the very fact that someone said, I like what you're doing. I want to come to one of your workshops and learn more about this.
Yeah. So you're just trying to model it in your own life to the best of your abilities, but then you're also doing the workshops, which are creating a container, a forum for kind of more systematically kind of learning the skills.
Yep. I mean, I'm a real believer in, as I said, in planting seeds. I don't necessarily expect that everyone who walks out of a workshop is going to have compassionate listening down, but I do trust they are walking out with what they needed for that weekend, whatever it may be. It may be something completely unattended that I didn't say, that another member of the workshop said, because we're all teachers there, even though I may be the facilitator. But what we're all trying to do to the best of our ability is to model a sense of kindness and care, compassion, and empathy. And so, again, like those drops of water wearing the rock down, we're all going back to the world, bit by bit, modeling and growing into whatever small change we're taking away from a particular workshop. And it's the same thing with all the interviews you're doing. I trust that all of these are drops of water that, may be too small in the moment to see, but in the long run, I trust there is an impact.
Yeah, as I'm trying to put together kind of a blueprint for building a culture of empathy. So gathering all these insights and start organizing them. And one of the things people have said is for building a culture of empathy is start a dialogue about it. just get people talking about it. So that's a bit of what I'm kind of one of the intentions, in these dialogues that you and I are having, is just get people talking about it, and then say, oh, there's people over there talking about empathy and compassion. There must be something to it. It's like just not being hidden away, but kind of out in the public and out kind of actively engaging others in this dialogue about how we can build a culture of empathy. So I guess
yeah. I see your posts on Facebook all the time. You have a lot of folks who've, liked your page. I mean, what's been your experience in each drop of water that you're doing? And what's your sense of, I don't like that word progress, but I can't think of a better word. What's your sense of the impact of what you're doing, Edwin, drop by drop by drop?
Yeah, that's a good question. I thought that, as I got into this about 4 years ago, so it's been kind of a learning process. And I thought that things would kind of move faster,
Yeah.
especially with Obama coming into office, and he was, such a proponent of empathy and had talked about it so much. And he essentially said that he was running for office in a sense because he wanted to bring the country together to do exactly what you're talking about, to change the political discourse and create a framework for empathy, and that he felt that he had the skills to do that. And so he thought that's something he could contribute. So I would say empathy was the core, but I haven't, it seems like he's tried in his way, but I kind of feel like he needs like an empathy team, with folks like yourself to kind of scale up, like the whole compassionate listening project, to kind of scale up, the work and kind of bring it at a larger scale and bring it into the kind of the national dialogue somehow. So I see it kind of happening slowly. I see it popping up here and there, but I guess I'm a little impatient and, want to kind of accelerate it, have things move a little bit faster. So
Yeah.
a little impatient, I guess.
Well, it's, I'm going to feed back to you, I've been familiar with your work for about maybe a year now. And it just seems to me, the thought I have is, why didn't someone do this sooner? And again, I can understand your impatience because I know you put a tremendous amount of energy into this, but I have a real sense of faith and trust that there is stuff happening that you may not see. The very fact that you have interviewed so many people and how, each of the people you interview, we all walk away with this in some fashion, thinking about this differently. So, I truly believe stuff is happening, but it's obviously a lot more invisible, or at least less visible. I don't like invisible, but it's, it's ground that has not been tilled in a long time. And I think it's just going to take time, but boy, are you tilling, buddy.
Yeah, I keep plugging away. I'm applying for a grant now through the 1440 Foundation for the conference. The interviews are part of a larger conference on how we get people like yourself and the compassionate listening community connected with other organizations and create like this ongoing, see my hands kind of going up, mushrooming kind of this. So, I see it moving, but that's nice to hear that, sometimes I wonder because, being inside, I don't quite see, I like to get the perspective of others. So that's very helpful to say, oh, okay, so somebody's seeing some movement and
Yeah, I think it's hard being a prophet, and that it's oftentimes only through, someone's chance remarks, that we actually know that we're having an impact. But it's, I truly believe it's sort of like what you're doing, what each of us is doing is like yeast, except it's a very slow growing yeast. But because it's, as you talked about, trying to pull all these different organizations together, I'm sure that you're aware of so many more organizations than I am because of your overview, and just that gift of trying to provide an umbrella for all of these is a bit of yeast in a lot of ways.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the bread. You have put the yeast in the breads. You must do baking. You know that no, the sense seeing the yeast kind of expanding slowly. It's kind of a slow process but
Yeah.
it kind of does
I don't,
get there.
yeah, I mean, I don't bake anymore, but I love the yeast because it's a chemical reaction. And it feels as if we can't control it. You know, you put the yeast in and it grows at its own pace.
Yeah, that reaction, that chemical reaction, I think might be dialogue. You know, if we can just get people kind of talking with each other and creating this dialogue, and if we can kind of get that dialogue getting into the political debate discussion and somehow transform that, I think that would be, you know, that's kind of to really and kind of be prepared that we're well networked, you know, with so that we can kind of have an effect like that on the political realm and actually bring. Because I've been to the Tea Party rallies, to the Occupy, you know, rallies, to demonstrations, to the Republican state convention here in California, to the Democratic state convention. I've been asking all these people, you know, tell me about empathy. You know, how does empathy fit into your view? So I'm kind of seeing. And you've done that so much too with the Compassionate Listening Project, going to Israel, bringing Israelis and Palestinians together, the German Jewish project that the Compassionate Listening Project did. And I think there's a lot of other initiatives like that too, bringing different, you know, kind of people in conflict together to have this empathic, compassionate connection.
No, I think that's true. I mean, you know, it's the yeast, it's the bridge building. You know, it's how do we take in the other? You know, and as I listen to you talk about, you know, going to the Tea Party rallies and Republican conventions, and you know, one of the things that I read about a year ago is that there are hardwired differences in Democrats and Republicans. You know, it doesn't account for, oh, you're a bad person and oh, you're a good person, depending upon which quote unquote side you're on. It's like, and it helped me to understand once I began to read read about those hardwired differences. You know, it's just a sense of, well, if you're different than I am, what is my choice about how to work with that, as opposed to just X you out of the picture? And again, it just gets back to each of us making a choice to welcome another human being in. And of course, there are times, as you said earlier, we have to set a boundary for self-care. But, you know, because it does start with self-care. If I am caring for myself, I'm more available to you. So it's almost like a tautology. We keep going around in circles. But, you know, more than anything else, it's just about being inclusive in this world as opposed to being isolating and shutting ourselves off.
Yeah, and I think it's like you're saying, trying to see more deeply. You were talking about, you know, there's kind of like this surface level that we connect at, and to have kind of the intention of really trying to see each other more deeply till we get down to the deeper common humanity of each other. And
That's it.
yeah, and one thing I did see with going to the Republican convention is there was a couple of young Republicans there, and I, you know, said, well, tell me about your values. What are your most important values? And the one guy there said, you know, protection. You know, we're gonna protect ourselves and, you know, our families, and so I just kind of did that, trying to hear and reflect what it was I was hearing. So protection is important, and just kept kind of being there, hearing what, and then it kind of came, well, security, and we're gonna, you know, this whole notion of wanting security, and then something that I found that was kind of different, and I don't really hear progressives doing when they're talking with conservatives, is kind of connecting. Well, I said it was kind of like you're afraid people are going to do you harm, so it's kind of going to fear, which was one of the things that you were talking about in ways to address, to build a culture of empathy, kind of come and see the fears. I believe it was you mentioned in one of your points. And so I said, oh, so you're concerned that there's people who are going to do you harm because they're not going to empathize with you. Because if they're empathizing with you, they're not going to, you know, break into your house, and you're not going to have your gun to, you know, shoot them or whatever.
Yeah.
And he said, yeah, that's right. And I said, yeah, so what can we do together to create more empathy in the world? He says, yeah, I guess empathy is important. And so it was like, it was a matter of seeing what was important to him, and kind of hearing it, really hearing it, not judging it. And then to kind of acknowledge the fear that was there, because there's a fear of being harmed. And then say it then, but then the thing was to connect that fear to a lack of empathy and make the conversation about how to foster empathy, instead of trying to dismiss the fear, say, oh, your fears are unfounded or something. So anyway, it really turned into a really nice conversation. There was one of the other guys that was there. He pulled out an iPhone, and he said, a friend of mine was a real jerk, self-centered, selfish, and his mother was dying of cancer, and she wrote this email. He wrote this letter to him, was like one of the last things she wrote to him, and I'd like to read it to you. And he, actually had it on his, smartphone, and he read it, and it was just a short letter. And it was basically, son, it's so important that you think about other people. It's the most, you'll find that in your life that caring for others is really kind of the most important thing. And he kind of went through it, and then he said, this changed my friend's life. He's like a totally different person now. Yeah. And so, but anyway, it was just the nature of the whole conversation went from, I could have been, judging, dismissing what they were saying, but really hear, go deeper, and then connect it to how do we create more empathy together. And then it ended with this really beautiful, story. And
yeah.
So.
I mean, I love that, because I hear that you allowed his story to unfold. And as that happened, he softened.
Yeah, that softening that you were talking about, right?
Yeah, and it's, I think it takes a sense of feeling whole inside to allow somebody else. And I think each of us has to be responsible for our own, interior, mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health. As if obviously you were feeling fairly whole and able to listen to that, you weren't feeling triggered or not that triggered. And, a couple of planks and that bridge got built.
Well, that was one of your points of building that bridge, was to acknowledge fear and take responsibility. So how do you see that working, kind of the dynamics of it? And do you have any stories about that?
When you say, no, I mean, part of it for me, I would reframe that to talking about acknowledging my vulnerabilities. And that's, one of the things when I first came to the Compassionate Listening Project, what was it, in 2006, one of the things I was blown away by was seeing these facilitators acknowledge their vulnerabilities. They're and some of it was embarrassing because they were human. And that gave me a huge gift. And that's one of the things I do in workshops, is I share things about myself, not TMI, not too much information, but the stories and the vulnerabilities are always in service to growth. And so the more that I can share myself with people, I find that opens the door to normalizing their sharing too. And so it brings the, relationship from small talk or anger or wherever it is, down to a place where we're both standing on the edges of a bridge. It's as if, in you're talking to the guy from the Tea Party about his fear. He didn't feel so lonely anymore. Once he was able to say he was worried about being secure, and you were able to hear him. There was nothing wrong with that. And so, the more that I think we can take the risk, or I'm not going to say we, the more that I can take the risk to be human, to share my vulnerabilities in service of opening the door for somebody else to feel that they're normal and human and to share their story. And then for me, it becomes, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know something will happen. Sometimes it goes way beyond anything I could have ever imagined, because we're each taking a risk at sharing our humanity.
Yeah, there's something about when we can share our own stories, our own humanity, that it kind of creates a space for the other person to do the same. They feel safer doing it, and somehow it creates kind of that deeper mirroring of each other.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that I can even add to that. I think that's absolutely true. And I mean, all of this to me, I use the word alchemical, and I believe it. I don't believe it as a rational process. If I'm going to offer my presence in the larger sense of P, of being a caring listener, someone who's willing to share my story, someone who's willing to ask questions of the person I'm talking to so I can know their story. And someone who's willing to do my own work inside when I'm feeling triggered. I don't know what the outcomes are, and there's a certain trust on my part. But I have found that it's like taking something that's very base and making it into something precious. And all of those things are my responsibility.
Well, that quality of being able to share and even be more. I mean, that's something I'm kind of looking at too. Is how to be aware of what's going on inside myself and be able to share that. And how one can do that and do it in a competitive way, kind of struggle, but how to kind of share it with kind of the intention of deepening a connection and kind of the really how kind of the state of mind for doing that is something I'm looking at. Sometimes I kind of do it by accident, or we'll share something and it just, but I can't. It's like how to do it kind of more consistently and how. And I think that part of it is that we all want to share what's going on inside of ourselves, but we're afraid of being judged or looking stupid or being demonized or being seen as weak or all these or losing an advantage. Like we're in a competitive society, so we're going to lose our competitive advantage against somebody else to win the job, to win I'm working on that grant proposal now, and it's the grants are kind of this competitive environment, right? It's like you have to compete against others. So I'm not going to tell you everything I'm doing because I'm trying to win the prize kind of thing. So there's all these kind of blocks to that quality of sharing. And if we have a pal like Gabriel the angel is kind of there, kind of non-judgmental, saying, sure, I'm there to listen to whatever you have to say and be there and not judge you. And then it becomes easy when you're in with people who you've developed that trust that you can share. It doesn't even take courage anymore. It's just kind of natural. So that's kind of like the state that I think society could move towards.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you as you're describing all these things, having that friend, that Gabriel, again, I'm just hearing you, I think, describe a culture, that supports that.
Yeah, exactly. Uh-huh.
And as I listen to you talk, and you're right, it is a very competitive culture. So, we wonder in being vulnerable, are we losing an advantage in some way? And part of what it makes me think about, and this is my particular value, it's how do I become fully who I am supposed to be? And part of that is taking the risk for me of being my authentic self.
Gasp.
Yeah, gasp. That's exactly it, and it becomes a question of weighing for me. And as I get older, I'm in my 60s now, so it's a little easier. But, for me, it becomes a case of if I can be truly and authentically who I am, that value is becoming stronger for me than trying to play a game. It becomes a question of how do I feel afterwards inside? What's my increased sense of wholeness when I am playing a chess game or when I'm just being Jan? And it's again, it's a felt sense of, and so when I have that felt sense of, it encourages me the next time to do the same thing, if at all possible. And I know, quite honestly, there are probably going to be people who think, we got her now. And I figure, that's going to have to be their problem.
Yeah. So you want to nurture that space and that quality, the feel. I mean, it's a very lovely feeling to have, to be able to just be open, to be calm and share yourself.
It is. I mean, it is, and I think it's tough in this world because of all the different things you mentioned, and it becomes a question of, what is it? What is it that makes us feel whole? I mean, what is it that makes you feel whole in this work that you're doing?
Well, it's actually these conversations. It's like, you're talking about nurturing that sense, that quality.
Yep.
These conversations is actually kind of helps, is actually nurturing. I really enjoy it. I mean, I really enjoy these conversations because it kind of nurtures that aspect in myself. So I can kind of do it through dialogue and
Yeah.
having these talks on a regular basis.
No, I love that. I mean, I hear you taking care of yourself and care of the world. What a nice combination. I mean, I'd like to believe that when we are being authentically ourselves, it's not selfish or just selfish, that we are truly contributing to the world by being fully ourselves. And I
Yeah.
hear, you're contributing and it's also nurturing you.
Yeah, it's that I thought it was so nicely expressed when you had that gasp. You know, I mean, you really because that really is the essence of the opposite, right? It's like we're kind of in that those two states of that, everything's kind of the breath goes out, you can't breathe because of fear and constriction and trying to shut down the emotions and versus kind of that quality of sharing and connecting, ever
Yeah,
more deeply,
yeah.
and kind of that
But
relationship between the two. What's causing that gasp, and what causes the that unfolding and deepening of connection.
I mean, have you found in the time that you've been doing this more of that, for you is growing?
I'm finding actually the more of a settling, kind of a deeper settling in something, of a space, more of a spaciousness. I've told this story before, but I mean, I keep wanting to refine and deepen these conversations. This is
Yeah,
just the first part. I'm hoping to do more like maybe like actually empathic listening groups where
right.
we kind of actually are more systematic or more focused on that very process, of kind of opening and having, a group and a community there to be present to kind of exercise those muscles and create the trust in those those neural pathways for that kind of that awareness and that consciousness. But one thing I did find, one insight I had, I did this freestyle dance, and I did notice it was when I was dancing, I noticed that fear and that anxiety within myself. And I can feel it within my body, just kind of feel the awareness. And I said, well, instead of like, pushing away, I'm going to try to go to it. I'm going to try to see it as clearly and as deeply as I can. Let it fill my consciousness. And so I would start going dancing towards it, and it would kind of get bigger, bigger, and then kind of dissolve, almost like melt away.
Mm.
But within 3 to 5 seconds, a new one with a whole different shape and quality would appear. And this just went on for like the whole dance, like for an hour and a half. But each time I got closer to that fear and the fear melted away, it was as if my body settled and became calmer. That at the end I felt so calm. And I felt almost like And so for me, that was an insight about one aspect of creating that awareness is to go to the fears, try to bring presence into the fears, let the fears grow, not try to push them aside, not try to analyze the fear, but just let's feel the fear in its aesthetic contours. And somehow they tend to, if they're not too overwhelming, they tend to melt away. But then there's other fears too, so it's kind of like a lifelong process, maybe in the sense that we're biologically wired for fear as well as these other emotions, and trying to find a process and a way of relating with these and fostering that empathic, compassionate component.
Yeah, I mean, I love the way the term you use. I mean, it is like a lifelong dance. I
Yeah.
mean, we describe the dance, but it is. I mean, and I'm reframing what I heard you say in my own words, in the sense of, I hear you taking responsibility for walking toward your fears, and finding that in doing them, some of them melt away until the newest batch comes. Putting
Yeah.
that in compassionate listening terms, I talked earlier about our wounds. How can each of us look at the places we've been wounded and see how those become the prisms through which we see and judge other people? Different words, same
Yeah.
thing. But it comes down to essentially what we're both saying is, how can each of us take personal responsibility for working with those fears, those wounds, and dancing and engaging with them, and finding that in doing so, that the doors open we didn't know were there before.
Yeah, I think there's that part of the personal responsibility, but there's something about the way that we're wired as human beings or mammals or something, is that to have that, the metaphor of Gabriel there,
Yeah.
that if we can go into those fears with other people
Yep.
and have bring that presence, bring my presence, bring their presence to those fears, and have those fears kind of melt away together with others, that is another aspect of adding to uh, that quality of connection.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, I hear that as a sense of being held in a lot of ways. Literally held in the sense of Gabriel. And I'm sort of hearing you describe different ways that we can support that culture. We confront our fears. We have other people and or whatever it is that nurtures us, so we feel less alone in this. And that would be an interesting piece just to have a group on. To have each of us describe the ways in which we feel less alone, in confronting our fears and in sharing our vulnerabilities. I mean, it opens up all this new territory.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm hoping to do with these dialogues. I'm starting with
Right.
getting a dialogue with everyone that I can find that's kind of has some insight about empathy, compassion,
Yeah.
and then getting us together to kind of experiment with what you're exactly talking about. Maybe we could actually do that as the next step. Try something like that, and maybe even at some point bring together some progressives and conservatives, for example, and actually have that kind of a dialogue, because it's so convenient with Skype to be able to do that. So I would love to, continue kind of the dialogue and explore this. It's a lifelong, quest. So
Good, good. Well, I clearly you have the passion for it, and I like the idea of bringing your idea. I mean, to me, that again is the capacity for change is amazing. And then the piece you just mentioned about getting conservatives and progressives together. Do you know about the new book by Parker Palmer called "Healing the Heart of Democracy"?
no.
Parker Palmer's a wonderful educator. And he had a book that came out last September. It's called "Healing the Heart of Democracy." And it really is about, I think it's worth checking out. I'm not going to go into the details of it because I'm blanking on them right now.
Mm-hmm.
But it really is about the kinds of things that we're talking about, which is sharing our vulnerabilities, telling our stories, talking as people from the heart, not just from a place of demonizing each other. But I mean, I'm hearing you talk about building an energy, not an energy. I can't think of the
A
words.
way of being, maybe.
Well, I mean, I see you talking about increasing the number of people who are involved in this, Edwin,
Mm-hmm.
bit by bit by bit. And I mean, to me, that's exciting. I think that, again, the power of all these seeds being planted, who knows what will come of it, but I trust something will. Maybe nothing that we expect, but I
Yeah.
think that my only responsibility is to do the best I can, and the results will be what they will be.
Okay, well, this has been a wonderful talk. Is there any final kind of thoughts you have? Anything you'd like to kind of cover before?
Um, I don't think so. I would give you the compassionate listening cheer, but there isn't one. Um, No, I think we've covered a lot of territory, and I'm grateful to have talked with a kindred soul. So thank you.
And you're doing workshops on an ongoing basis, or
I
how?
am. I am.
How can people kind of connect with you? And
Well, I'm going to have a new website in the next month and a half called Kind Heart Communications. And I can be connected with through the main Compassionate Listening website at compassionatelistening.org in the meantime. So that's probably the best bet for the next 6 weeks until I get my own website up.
okay, then you'll have a website. People can connect with you and kind of find out about your workshops and.
Yep, and I love it. I've decided that Kind Heart Communications, sort of, as I told you earlier on, what's central to my being is being kind. So trying to send that type of energy out with that title.
Okay, well, wonderful. It's been a delight to kind of chat with you, and I hope we can keep these. If you have any ideas for more specific, topics to explore, I'd love to continue the dialogue. You're a good listener too. So it was fun. I got really heard. I felt heard too.
That's really important for me to hear, but I mean, that's what I love. I love the dialogues. I like having the capacity. I'm someone who sort of shies away from the limelight, and I like having these dialogues. So if there's another opportunity for this, if something strikes you or something strikes me, we'll do it again.
Great. Okay, well then, until that point, thank you very much, Jan, for taking the time and sharing so much.
Okay, take care, and thank you for all your good work.
Bye.
Bye.
See the world through other people's eyes. Empathy is a quality of character that can change the world.